The gunshot that shattered the morning silence wasn't what made Xander Calloway look up from shoeing his mare. It was the absolute stillness that followed, as if the entire town of Ouray, Colorado, had collectively held its breath in the summer of 1882. He straightened slowly, hammer still gripping in his calloused hand, and watched as a lone wagon creaked into the dusty main street, driven by a broad-shouldered man with iron-gray hair and eyes that scanned the scattered buildings with the wary assessment of someone who had seen too much of the world's cruelty. Beside him sat a young woman, maybe 20 years old, with auburn hair tied back in a simple braid and a face that would have been beautiful if not for the haunted emptiness in her brown eyes. Xander found himself staring longer than was proper, not at her features but at the way she held herself, rigid and distant, as though she existed in a different realm from everyone around her. The wagon stopped in front of the general store, and the older man climbed down with the careful movements of someone nursing old injuries. He reached up to help the young woman, but she was already descending on her own, her movements efficient and practiced. Xander noticed she never looked at the man directly, never met anyone's eyes as a small crowd of curious townspeople began to gather. The silver-haired stranger cleared his throat and addressed the growing assembly. "Name is Howard Preston," he announced, his voice carrying the gravel of too many cold nights and harsh whiskey. "This here is my daughter, Hannah. We are looking to settle, if this town will have us. I am a carpenter by trade, and Hannah can sew, cook, and manage a household better than most." Hannah stood perfectly still beside her father, her hands folded at her waist, her gaze fixed on some invisible point in the middle distance. Xander watched as several women whispered to each other, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and something else, something that looked like pity. The town's mayor, a portly man named Silas Drummond, stepped forward and extended his hand to Howard. "We can always use skilled hands in Ouray," Silas said warmly. "The old Hendricks place has been empty since last winter. Nothing fancy, but the roof is sound and it has a good workshop attached. Would that suit you?" Howard shook the mayor's hand firmly. "That would suit us fine. We appreciate the hospitality." Throughout the entire exchange, Hannah never spoke. Not a word of greeting, not a murmur of thanks. Her silence was so complete, so absolute, that it seemed to have weight and substance. Xander found himself wondering what tragedy could carve such emptiness into a person. He had seen plenty of hardship in his 26 years. The West had a way of grinding people down, but this felt different. This felt deliberate, like she had locked herself away somewhere deep inside where no one could reach her. The crowd dispersed as Howard climbed back onto the wagon, and Hannah followed suit with that same mechanical efficiency. Xander returned to his work, but his thoughts kept drifting back to those empty brown eyes. He told himself it was none of his business. He had his own ranch to run, his own problems to solve. The last thing he needed was to get tangled up in someone else's mysteries. But fate, as it often does in small mountain towns, had other plans. 3 days later, Xander rode into town to pick up supplies and found Hannah Preston standing outside the general store with a heavy sack of flour at her feet. She was staring at it with an expression of quiet frustration, clearly trying to figure out how to get it back to her wagon, which was parked a good 50 yards down the street. Her father was nowhere in sight. Xander dismounted and touched the brim of his hat. "Morning, Miss Preston. That looks mighty heavy. Would you like some help?" She turned those brown eyes on him, and for a moment, Xander felt like he was falling into deep water. There was intelligence there, sharp and assessing, but also something guarded, something afraid. She glanced at the flower, then back at him, and gave a single, economical nod. He hefted the sack easily onto his shoulder and started toward her wagon. She walked beside him, maintaining a careful distance of about 3 feet, as if she had measured it precisely. When they reached the wagon, he loaded the flour into the back and dusted off his hands. "Anything else you need carried?" he asked. She shook her head, then seemed to hesitate. Her lips parted slightly, and Xander had the strangest sensation that she was fighting some invisible battle inside herself. But no words came. Instead, she reached into the small purse hanging from her wrist and pulled out a coin, offering it to him. "No, madam," Xander said gently. "No payment necessary, just being neighborly." She looked at the coin, then at him, and something flickered across her face. Confusion, maybe, or disbelief. Like the concept of someone helping without expecting something in return was foreign to her. She slowly tucked the coin away, then placed her hand over her heart and dipped her head in what was clearly a gesture of thanks. "You are welcome," Xander said, and meant it. As he watched her climb into the wagon and drive away, he realized he wanted to see her again, not out of pity, but out of genuine curiosity. There was a person locked away behind that silence, someone fighting to be seen and heard in the only ways she could manage. And Xander Calloway had never been one to walk away from someone who needed help, even if they never asked for it. Over the following weeks, Ouray settled into its familiar rhythms, and the Prestons became part of the community's fabric. Howard proved to be an excellent carpenter, and his work was meticulous and fair-priced. Hannah remained an enigma. She accompanied her father to church on Sundays, sitting in the back pew with her hands folded and her eyes downcast. She shopped for supplies with a carefully written list, pointing to items she needed since she never spoke. The townspeople had stopped trying to engage her in conversation, though the whispers continued. Xander made a point of being in town more often than strictly necessary. He told himself it was because he had business to attend to, but deep down, he knew he was hoping to see her. When he did, he always offered help if it seemed needed. A hand with loading supplies, holding a door, once even catching a basket of eggs that had nearly tumbled from her arms. Each time, she would look at him with those searching eyes, as if trying to determine his motives, and each time, she would offer that small gesture of thanks, hand over heart, head bowed. He never pushed for more, never asked questions she could not answer easily. He simply made himself useful, and then stepped back, giving her space to breathe. It was nearly a month after the Prestons arrived when Xander encountered Hannah in an unexpected place. He had ridden up into the hills above his ranch to check on a section of fence and found her sitting on a flat boulder, overlooking a mountain meadow carpeted with wildflowers. She had a sketchbook in her lap and was drawing with intense concentration, her hand moving in quick, confident strokes. She looked up at the sound of his horse's approach, and for just a moment he saw panic flash across her face. But then she recognized him, and the tension eased from her shoulders, though she did not quite relax. Xander dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and unthreatening. "Afternoon, Miss Preston. Beautiful spot you found here." She watched him carefully as he approached, her hand resting protectively over her sketchbook. When he was about 10 feet away, he stopped and made a show of looking out over the meadow rather than at her. "I come up here sometimes myself," he said conversationally, "when the ranch gets too loud in my head. There is something about the quiet up here that helps things settle into place." He heard the soft rustle of paper and glanced over to see her holding up the sketchbook, showing him what she had been drawing. It was the meadow, rendered in careful pencil lines, every flower and blade of grass given individual attention. But it was not just a technical exercise. There was emotion in the drawing, a sense of peace and beauty that spoke to how she saw the world. "That is remarkable," Xander said honestly. "You have real talent." She pulled the book back and looked at it critically, as if she did not quite believe him. Then she flipped back several pages and showed him another drawing. This one was of the town's main street, captured in early morning light. Every building was precisely detailed, but what caught Xander's attention was the way she had drawn the people. A woman laughing with her children, 2 old men playing checkers outside the saloon, a dog sleeping in a patch of sunlight. Each figure told a small story. "You see a lot," Xander observed. "More than most people, I would wager." Hannah closed the sketchbook and looked at him directly for the first time since he had arrived. Her eyes were questioning, searching his face for something. He met her gaze steadily, letting her look her fill. "I lost my mother when I was 12, he found himself saying, though he had not planned to share that. "Fever took her in the space of 3 days. For months after, I could not find words for what I felt. It was like the grief was too big for language. So I started working with my hands instead. Building things, fixing things. That was how I learned to speak again, I guess. Through action instead of words." Something shifted in Hannah's expression, not quite a smile, but a softening, an acknowledgement. She understood what he was trying to say, that there were many ways to communicate, many languages beyond speech. She opened her sketchbook to a blank page and began to draw quickly. Xander watched, fascinated, as an image took shape. It was a young girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with long hair and a wide smile. Next to her was an older girl who looked remarkably like Hannah. They were holding hands. When she finished, she held it up for him to see, then pointed to the younger girl and shook her head slowly. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Your sister?" Xander asked quietly. Hannah nodded. "She passed?" Another nod, and this time a single tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. She brushed it away quickly, almost angrily. Xander felt his chest tighten with sympathy. "I am sorry. That kind of loss, it changes everything." Hannah looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her making some kind of decision. She turned to a new page and began drawing again. This time, when she showed him, it was an image of a small house with a porch. A man and woman stood in the yard, and between them were two girls. It was clearly a memory, a snapshot of happier times. Then she turned the page and drew the same house, but now it was different. Dark. The door hung open at an angle, and inside, visible through a window, were rough shapes that suggested violence. Xander's jaw tightened. "Someone hurt your family." Hannah's hand trembled as she nodded. She flipped to another page and drew quickly, almost frantically. A group of men on horses. She could not capture their faces in detail, but the menace in their postures was clear. Then she drew the house again, this time with flames rising from the roof. "They burned your home," Xander said, his voice rough. She nodded and drew one more image. The two girls from the first drawing, but now the younger one was lying still on the ground. The older one, Hannah, knelt beside her, mouth open in what could only be a scream. "You were there," Xander breathed. "You saw it happen." Hannah closed the sketchbook with shaking hands and pressed it against her chest, rocking slightly. Xander wanted desperately to reach out to her, to offer some kind of comfort, but he sensed that would be the wrong move. Instead, he sat down on the ground a respectful distance away and let the silence stretch between them. After a long while, he spoke. "My father used to say that some wounds go so deep, they change the landscape of who we are. They make rivers run different directions. But that does not mean the land is ruined, just different, still capable of growing new things." Hannah looked at him, really looked at him, and Xander felt that sensation of falling again. But this time, it did not feel frightening. It felt like the beginning of something. "You do not have to carry it alone," he said softly. "Whatever burden you are bearing, there are people who would help, if you let them." She studied his face for a long moment, then reached out slowly, hesitantly, and touched his hand where it rested on his knee. Just a brief pressure of her fingers against his, but it sent a jolt through him like lightning. Then she withdrew, gathered her sketchbook and the small bag she had brought, and stood. Xander rose as well. "May I ride with you back to town? Make sure you get home safe." She considered this, then nodded once. As they rode down the mountain, her on the small mare she had ridden up, and him on his gelding, Xander found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him. The way she sat her horse, straight-backed and competent. The way the afternoon light caught in her auburn hair. The way she looked at the world around her, taking in every detail with those watchful eyes. When they reached the outskirts of town, Hannah reined in her horse and looked at him. She touched her hand to her heart, that gesture of thanks he had come to recognize. But this time, she held his gaze while she did it. This time, there was something more in her eyes. Trust, perhaps, or the beginning of it. Xander touched the brim of his hat. "Good afternoon, Miss Preston. I hope to see you again soon." She nodded, and unless he was very much mistaken, there was the ghost of a smile at the corners of her mouth. As summer deepened into August, Xander found reasons to visit the meadow more often. He would bring work with him, fence posts that needed mending or leather that needed working, and he would settle a respectful distance from where Hannah sat with her sketchbook. They did not always acknowledge each other directly, but her presence was a constant awareness in his mind, and he suspected from the way she sometimes glanced his direction that she felt the same. Gradually, imperceptibly, the distance between them shrank. One day she was 50 feet away. The next time, 30, then 20. Until one afternoon, Xander looked up from the bridle he was repairing to find Hannah sitting just 10 feet away, close enough that he could see the details of what she was drawing. It was him. She was drawing him as he worked, capturing the concentration on his face and the way his hands moved with practiced efficiency. When she realized he had noticed, she flushed and started to close the book, but he held up a hand. "Please, do not stop on my account. I am honored to be your subject." She hesitated, then reopened the book and continued, though her cheeks remained pink. Xander went back to his work, but he was intensely conscious of her gaze on him, studying him, translating him into lines and shadow on paper. When she finished, she turned the book toward him. He set down his work and moved closer to see it properly. The drawing was extraordinary. She had captured not just his physical features, but something essential about who he was. There was kindness in the eyes she had drawn, and strength in the set of the jaw, but also a hint of loneliness that he had not realized he carried so visibly. "Is that how you see me?" he asked quietly. Hannah nodded slowly, watching his reaction with anxious eyes. "Then you see more clearly than most," he said. "This is good work, Hannah. Really good." It was the first time he had used her given name without the formality of Miss Preston, and he saw her register it. She did not pull away or seem offended. Instead, she ducked her head, but not before he caught the pleased expression on her face. She flipped to a new page and began writing in careful, precise letters. When she showed it to him, it read, "Thank you for not treating me like I am broken." Xander felt something crack open in his chest. "You are not broken. You are surviving the best way you know how." She wrote again, "Most people avoid me, or worse, they pity me." "I do not pity you," Xander said firmly. "I admire you. It takes courage to face each day when carrying what you carry." Hannah looked at him for a long moment, then began writing again. This time, her hand moved faster, as if a dam had broken. When she turned the book to him, there were several sentences covering the page. "I have not spoken since the night they came, the night Sarah died. I screamed until my voice gave out, and when it came back, I found I had nothing left to say. The words are still there, in my mind, but they cannot find their way out. My father thinks time will heal it. I do not think time works that way." Xander read it twice, absorbing every word. "No," he agreed. "Time does not heal. It just gives us space to learn how to carry the weight differently. But that does not mean you will carry it alone forever." She took the book back and wrote, "Why are you kind to me?" "Because you deserve kindness," Xander said simply. "And because when I look at you, I see someone brave and strong, someone who has been through hell and came out the other side still able to see beauty in a meadow full of wildflowers. That is not something to pity. That is something to celebrate." Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling through them, a real smile this time, not just a ghost of one. It transformed her face, made her luminous. Xander found himself smiling back, his heart doing strange acrobatics in his chest. She wrote one more line. "Will you come back tomorrow?" "Wild horses could not keep me away," he promised, and he meant it. Whatever was growing between them, fragile and tentative as new grass after a fire, it felt precious. It felt like something worth protecting, worth nurturing. Xander had not planned on falling for anyone, especially not someone whose pain ran so deep and complex. But the heart, he was learning, did not much care about plans. The next day, Xander arrived at the meadow to find Hannah already there, but she was not alone. A young man, maybe 19 or 20, stood uncomfortably close to her, speaking rapidly while she shook her head and tried to edge away. Xander recognized him as Jack Sutton, the son of one of the local ranchers, known more for his swagger than his sense. "Come on now," Jack was saying as Xander approached. "It is not like you can say no, is it? Just one little kiss. No one needs to know." Hannah's face was pale, her eyes wide with distress. She held her sketchbook in front of her like a shield, shaking her head more emphatically. Xander's vision went red around the edges. He dismounted in one smooth motion and crossed the distance between them in long strides. "I believe the lady has made her feelings clear, Sutton. Time for you to leave." Jack spun around, his face flushing with anger and embarrassment. "This is not your concern, Calloway. I am just having a conversation." "Conversation requires two willing participants," Xander said coldly. "I only see one here. Now, I will ask you once more, politely, leave." Jack's hand dropped to the gun at his hip, and Xander saw Hannah's eyes go wide with fear. But Xander had been in enough tight situations to know that the man who drew first was often the man who ended up dead. He kept his own hand loose at his side, ready but not threatening. "You do not want to do that," Xander said quietly. "Think about what you are really willing to die for today." For a tense moment, the meadow was silent except for the wind moving through the grass. Then Jack's hand moved away from his gun and he spat on the ground. "She is not worth the trouble anyway. Can't even talk like a normal person." He stalked to his horse and mounted up, kicking the animal harder than necessary and galloping away down the mountain. Xander watched until he was out of sight, then turned to Hannah. She was trembling, her sketchbook clutched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "Are you hurt?" Xander asked gently. "Did he touch you?" She shook her head, but the trembling did not stop. Xander took a careful step closer, then another, until he was near enough to reach out if needed, but not crowding her space. "You are safe now," he said softly. "He is gone, and he will not bother you again. I will make sure of it." Hannah's breathing was coming in short, rapid gasps, and Xander realized she was on the edge of panic. He had seen it before in horses that had been mistreated, that same wide-eyed terror that came from feeling trapped and helpless. "Hannah," he said, his voice low and calm, "look at me, just at me. You are safe. I promise you are safe." Her eyes locked onto his, desperate for an anchor. He held her gaze steadily, letting her see that he meant every word. Slowly, gradually, her breathing began to even out. The color started to return to her face. When she seemed steadier, Xander said, "I am going to make a suggestion, and you can say no if you want. But I think it might help if you learned how to protect yourself, not with words, but with your hands. I could teach you some basic techniques, how to get away from someone who grabs you, how to defend yourself if you need to. Would you be willing to learn?" Hannah considered this, then nodded slowly. She opened her sketchbook to a blank page and wrote, "I never want to feel that helpless again." "Then you will not," Xander promised. "We will start tomorrow, if you are willing. Come by my ranch in the morning. I will show you some things that might help." She wrote, "Why do you keep helping me?" Xander took a deep breath, deciding to risk honesty. "Because somewhere along the way, I started caring about what happens to you. Because when I think about someone hurting you or scaring you, it makes me want to tear the world apart. And because I think maybe, just maybe, you are starting to care about what happens to me too." Hannah stared at him, her eyes searching his face. Then she reached out and took his hand, not briefly this time, but with intention, weaving her fingers through his and holding on. Her hand was smaller than his, the fingers stained with pencil lead and calloused from work, and it felt absolutely perfect in his grasp. They stood like that for a long time, hands joined, saying more in the silence than 1,000 words could have conveyed. When the sun began to sink toward the mountains, casting everything in gold and amber light, Hannah finally released his hand. But before she turned to go, she reached up and touched his face gently, her fingertips tracing the line of his jaw. Then she was gone, riding down the mountain on her mare, leaving Xander standing in the meadow, with his heart pounding and his mind racing. He had been in love before, or thought he had, but it had been nothing like this. This felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that jumping would either teach him to fly or destroy him completely, and finding that he did not much care which it was as long as he got to leap. True to her word, Hannah arrived at Xander's ranch the next morning, just as the sun was burning off the dawn mist. She wore a simple brown dress and boots, her hair in a practical braid down her back, and she carried that ever-present sketchbook tucked under one arm. Xander met her in the yard, where he had already cleared a space for their practice. "Morning," he greeted her with a smile. "Thank you for coming. Now, the first thing you need to understand about defending yourself is that the goal is never to win a fight. The goal is to get away. Your job is to surprise your attacker, break their hold or their focus, and then run like hell. Understood?" Hannah nodded, her expression serious and focused. "Good. Now, the most common way someone will try to grab a woman is from the front, by the arms or shoulders, like this." He demonstrated, his hands hovering near her shoulders without actually touching. "May I?" She nodded permission, and he gently gripped her shoulders, firm enough to demonstrate, but not hard enough to frighten. When someone holds you like this, your instinct might be to pull away, but that usually does not work because they are expecting it. Instead, you want to move toward them, into their space, which they are not expecting. Then you use your arms to break the hold. Let me show you. He walked her through the technique slowly, explaining each movement and the reasoning behind it. Hannah was an excellent student, focused and quick to learn. When she successfully broke his hold on the third try, her eyes lit up with something that looked like fierce satisfaction. They practiced for nearly 2 hours, working through various scenarios and defensive techniques. Xander was careful to keep everything professional and instructional, but he could not help noticing the trust it took for Hannah to let him into her space like this, to let him put hands on her even in a teaching context. It spoke volumes about how much progress they had made. When they finally took a break, both of them were sweating, despite the cool mountain morning. Xander drew water from the well and offered Hannah the dipper first. She drank gratefully, then pulled out her sketchbook and wrote, "Thank you. I feel stronger already." "You were always strong," Xander corrected gently. "Now you just have more tools to work with." She smiled at that, then wrote, "Will you tell me about your ranch, how you came to have it?" They settled on the porch steps, and Xander found himself talking more than he had in months. He told her about inheriting the land from his mother's father, about the years of hard work building it into something sustainable, about his dreams of expanding the horse breeding operation. Hannah listened with those attentive eyes, occasionally writing questions that showed she was not just hearing him, but truly understanding. When it was her turn, she wrote about her childhood in Kansas, about her sister Sarah, who had been bright and funny and fearless, about her mother, who had died when Hannah was 15, leaving just her, Sarah, and their father, about the men who had come in the night, claiming their father owed money to the wrong people, about how Sarah had tried to run and had been shot down like a dog in the yard, about how Hannah had screamed and screamed until something inside her broke and she had never been able to speak again. Xander read every word, his heart breaking for her with each sentence. When she finished, he looked up to find tears streaming down her face, though she made no sound. Without thinking, he reached out and pulled her into his arms, tucking her head under his chin and holding her while she wept silently against his chest. "I am so sorry," he murmured into her hair. "I am so damn sorry that happened to you. You did not deserve that. Sarah did not deserve that. None of it was your fault." She clung to him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and he held her tighter, wishing he could absorb some of her pain, wishing he could turn back time and protect her from what had happened. But all he could do was be there now, solid and steady, a safe harbor in the storm of her grief. When her tears finally subsided, she pulled back just far enough to look up at him. Her eyes were red and puffy, but there was something in them he had not seen before. Gratitude, yes, but also affection. Real, genuine affection that made his breath catch. She pulled her sketchbook back out and wrote with shaking hands. "I have not cried like that since it happened. I think I forgot how." "Sometimes we need permission to fall apart," Xander said softly, "and someone to catch us when we do." She wrote, "Thank you for catching me." "Always," he promised, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Over the following weeks, Hannah came to the ranch every few days for defense training, but it became clear to both of them that the lessons were just an excuse to spend time together. They would practice for an hour, then end up talking, or rather, Xander talking, while Hannah wrote responses and showed him sketches. He learned about her love of books, how she would read anything she could get her hands on. He learned that she was teaching herself to cook from her mother's old recipes, each meal a kind of memorial. He learned that she dreamed of someday having a garden full of flowers, just because they were beautiful and beauty mattered. She learned that he had wanted to be a horse trainer since he was a boy, that he had a gift for understanding what animals were thinking and feeling. She learned that he had been engaged once, years ago, but the woman had left him for a banker in Denver who could offer her an easier life. She learned that he sometimes woke in the night afraid that he would end up alone, that all his hard work building the ranch would mean nothing if there was no one to share it with. They learned each other's rhythms and patterns, the small gestures and expressions that conveyed meaning beyond language. Xander discovered he could read Hannah's eyes like books, understanding her moods and thoughts from the smallest shifts in her gaze. When her eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, she was amused. When they went distant and unfocused, she was remembering something painful. When they caught his and held, direct and unwavering, she was telling him something important, something that mattered. And Hannah learned to read him right back. She could tell when he was worried about the ranch from the way his shoulders tensed. She could tell when he was happy from the particular rhythm of his whistling. She could tell, with absolute certainty, when he was looking at her with that expression that made her heart race and her breath come short. It was late September when everything changed. The aspens on the mountains had turned gold, painting the landscape in shades of amber and honey. Xander and Hannah had ridden up to their meadow, which had become their place, their sanctuary from the world. The wildflowers of summer had faded to autumn grasses, but it was still beautiful in its own way. They sat together on their usual boulder, close enough now that their shoulders brushed. Hannah was sketching the view, while Xander worked on a bridle, the comfortable silence between them feeling as natural as breathing. Then Hannah set down her pencil and began writing in her book, the scratch of lead on paper the only sound besides the wind. When she finished, she handed the book to Xander with hands that trembled slightly. He read what she had written, then read it again to make sure he had not misunderstood. I am falling in love with you. I think I have been for weeks now. I am terrified to tell you this because I do not know if you could love someone like me, someone broken and silent. But I am more terrified of never telling you and wondering for the rest of my life what might have been. You have taught me that I am still capable of feeling joy, of feeling safe, of feeling like maybe I am not completely lost after all. I do not know what happens next, but I needed you to know. Xander's hands shook as he held the sketchbook. He looked up to find Hannah watching him with naked vulnerability in her eyes, every defense stripped away, waiting for his response. "Aunt Hannah," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I have been in love with you since the day in this meadow when you showed me your drawings, maybe even before that. When I am with you, the world makes sense in a way it never has before. You are not broken. You are the strongest, bravest, most extraordinary woman I have ever met. And I would be honored, absolutely honored, if you would let me love you for the rest of my life." The smile that broke across her face was like sunrise, brilliant and warm and full of promise. She reached up and cupped his face in both hands, her eyes asking a question. Xander understood immediately. He nodded, and she leaned in slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, before pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was soft and sweet and trembling with emotion. Xander's arms came around her, pulling her close as the kiss deepened. She tasted like hope and possibility, like every good thing he had ever dreamed of but never quite believed he deserved. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Hannah was crying again, but these were tears of joy. She grabbed her sketchbook and wrote frantically, "I was so afraid you would see me as damaged, as too much trouble." "Never," Xander said fiercely. "You are worth every bit of trouble, and then some. You are worth everything, Hannah." They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to set, talking and kissing and making plans. Xander wanted to court her properly, with her father's blessing and permission. Hannah wanted that too, though she wrote that she was nervous about her father's reaction. Howard had become protective to the point of smothering since the attack, and she worried he would think she was not ready for a relationship. "Then we will take it slow," Xander said. "We will show him that I am serious about you, that I am not going anywhere. Whatever it takes, Hannah. I am in this for the long haul." The next evening, Xander rode to the Preston house with his hat in his hands and his heart hammering against his ribs. Howard answered the door with a wary expression that did not quite hide his curiosity. "Mr. Preston, sir," Xander said formally. "I was hoping I might speak with you about your daughter." Howard's expression hardened immediately. "What about her?" "May I come in? This is not a conversation for a doorstep." Howard considered, then stepped back to allow Xander entry. Hannah was sitting by the fireplace with her mending, but she looked up when Xander entered. He met her eyes briefly, drawing courage from the encouragement he saw there, then turned his attention to her father. "Mr. Preston, I will get straight to the point. I have come to care deeply for Hannah over these past months. She is an extraordinary woman, smart and talented and strong. I would like your permission to court her properly, with an eye toward marriage if she will have me." Howard's face flushed dark red. "You have got some nerve, Calloway. My daughter cannot even speak. How could she possibly manage as a rancher's wife?" "She speaks just fine," Xander said evenly, "just not with words, and she would not be managing alone. We would be partners in everything. I love her, Mr. Preston, with everything I am. And unless I am very much mistaken, she loves me too." "She does not know what she wants," Howard snapped. "She is vulnerable, damaged. You are taking advantage of that." "Papa, no!" The voice was hoarse and cracking, barely above a whisper, but it was unmistakably Hannah's. Both men spun to stare at her. She had risen from her chair, her hands clenched at her sides, her face pale but determined. "No, you are wrong." "Hannah," Howard breathed, his anger forgotten in shock. "You are speaking." "I love him," Hannah forced out, each word clearly painful but equally clearly meant. "I love him, and he loves me. Not because I am damaged, but despite everything, because of who I am. He sees me, Papa. Really sees me. Please do not take that away." Tears were streaming down Howard's face. He crossed to his daughter and pulled her into a fierce embrace. I am sorry, little bird. I am so sorry. I have been so afraid of losing you too that I forgot you needed to live." Hannah clung to her father, her own tears falling. "I will always be your daughter, but I need this. I need him." Howard pulled back and looked at Xander over Hannah's head. "You hurt her, and there will not be a place on this earth you can hide from me." "I would expect nothing less," Xander said solemnly. "You have my word, sir. I will spend every day of my life making sure she is happy and safe and loved." Howard nodded slowly, then released Hannah and held out his hand to Xander. "Then you have my blessing for what it is worth." Xander shook his hand firmly, then turned to Hannah. She was smiling through her tears, and when she spoke again, her voice was still rough but growing stronger. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you both." The courtship that followed was the happiest time of Xander's life. He and Hannah were inseparable, spending every possible moment together. He brought her flowers picked from the meadow and taught her to ride his favorite mare. She drew portraits of his horses and slowly, painfully, began to use her voice again. It was a struggle for her, the words often getting stuck or coming out wrong, but she persevered with the same stubborn determination she brought to everything else. The town watched their romance unfold with a mixture of curiosity and approval. Most people were genuinely happy to see Hannah finding joy after so much pain. A few, like Jack Sutton, muttered darkly about it, but they kept their distance after Xander made it very clear that any harassment of Hannah would be dealt with swiftly and decisively. By the time the first snow fell in late November, Xander knew he was ready. He had his grandmother's ring, a simple gold band with a small sapphire that matched Hannah's eyes, and he had a plan. On a cold Saturday afternoon, he took Hannah up to their meadow one last time before winter locked the mountain roads. The meadow was transformed by snow, everything soft and white and pristine. They dismounted and walked to their boulder, now dusted with frost, and Xander took both of Hannah's hands in his. "Hannah Preston," he said, his heart in his throat. "The day you rode into Ouray, I had no idea my life was about to change forever. You have taught me that love is not about perfect words or grand gestures. It is about seeing someone, really seeing them, and choosing to stand beside them every single day. You have given me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me, the gift of your trust and your heart. And I am asking if you will have me to let me spend the rest of my life earning that gift. Will you marry me?" Hannah's eyes welled with tears, and she nodded so vigorously that droplets flew from her lashes. "Yes," she whispered, her voice growing stronger. "Yes, Xander. Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and devotion into that single perfect moment. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at once, Xander realized that this was what home felt like. Not a place, but a person. She was his home, and he was hers, and nothing else mattered. They were married in early spring of 1883, in a small ceremony at the church in Ouray, with most of the town in attendance. Hannah wore a dress she had sewn herself, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she was so beautiful that Xander felt his eyes sting as she walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Howard had tears streaming down his face as he placed Hannah's hand in Xander's, but he was smiling. "Take care of my girl," he said gruffly. "With my life," Xander promised. The ceremony was short and simple. When the pastor asked if anyone objected, there was only warm silence. And when he pronounced them husband and wife, Xander kissed his bride with all the love in his heart, while the congregation cheered and applauded. The reception was held at the town hall, with food and music and dancing. Hannah managed to say a few words of thanks to everyone who had come, her voice still rough and halting, but growing stronger each day. Xander never left her side, his hand always finding hers, his eyes always seeking her out in the crowd. As the evening drew to a close, they climbed into Xander's wagon for the ride back to the ranch, which was now their ranch, their home. Howard hugged his daughter fiercely one last time, whispering something in her ear that made her smile and nod. Then Xander clicked to the horses, and they were off, leaving the celebration behind. The ranch house was small but comfortable, and Xander had spent weeks preparing it for his bride. Fresh curtains on the windows, a new quilt on the bed, and in the corner of the main room, a desk with good light where Hannah could draw to her heart's content. When she saw it, she turned to him with such joy on her face that he knew he would remember this moment for the rest of his life. "You did all this for me?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. "I would do anything for you," Xander said simply. "This is just the beginning." That night, they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies the way they had learned each other's hearts. Hannah was nervous at first, but Xander was patient and gentle, letting her set the pace, always checking to make sure she was comfortable. When she finally relaxed into his arms, giving herself over to pleasure and trust, it was the most beautiful thing he had ever experienced. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the moonlight, streaming through the window, and Hannah traced patterns on Xander's chest with her fingertips. She seemed to be gathering her courage for something, and finally, she spoke. "I never thought I could have this," she whispered. "A husband who loves me, a home, a future. After Sarah died, I felt like I died too. Like the best parts of me were gone forever. But you brought me back to life, Xander. You taught me that I could be happy again." Xander kissed her forehead tenderly. "You brought yourself back, sweetheart. I just held your hand along the way, and I plan to keep holding it for the rest of our lives." "Promise?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "Promise," he said firmly. "Through everything that comes, good and bad, easy and hard, I am yours, Hannah Calloway, for all time." She smiled at that, at the sound of her new name, and snuggled deeper into his embrace. "I love you," she murmured. "So much it scares me sometimes." "Love should be a little scary," Xander said with a quiet laugh. "It means we are brave enough to risk our hearts, and I would not have it any other way." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found their way home. The first year of marriage was an adjustment, as all first years are, but it was also full of joy. Hannah threw herself into making the ranch house a real home, sewing curtains and planting a vegetable garden, and learning to cook the hearty meals Xander needed after long days working with the horses. Her voice continued to strengthen, though she still had days when speaking was difficult, and she relied on her sketchbook or simple gestures. Xander never minded. He had learned to read her so well that he often knew what she needed before she could ask. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Xander's horse breeding program gained a reputation throughout Colorado, and buyers came from as far as Denver to purchase his well-trained animals. Hannah proved to have a gift for the business side of things, keeping meticulous records and managing their finances with a shrewd eye. Together, they made a formidable team. Howard visited often, and Xander could see the peace it brought Hannah to have her father close by. The older man had mellowed since the wedding, his protective instincts easing as he saw how happy his daughter was. He and Xander developed a genuine friendship, bonding over carpentry projects and shared meals. It was in the late summer of 1884, as Hannah and Xander sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, that she turned to him with an expression he could not quite read. She took his hand and placed it on her belly, holding it there while she watched his face. It took Xander a moment to understand, and then his eyes went wide. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" Hannah nodded, a smile blooming across her face. "I am with child. We are going to have a baby." Xander let out a whoop of joy and scooped her into his arms, spinning her around until she was laughing and swatting at him to put her down. When he finally set her back on her feet, his hands went immediately to her belly, as if he could already feel the life growing there. "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby. Hannah, this is incredible. You are incredible." "Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear it. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Xander said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am overwhelmed. I am terrified. I am more grateful than I have ever been in my entire life. We are going to be parents, Hannah. We are going to have a family." She leaned into him, resting her head on his chest. "I want to be a good mother. I want our child to feel safe and loved every single day." "They will," Xander assured her. "How could they not, with you as their mother? You are the strongest person I know, sweetheart. This baby is going to be so lucky to have you." "To have us," Hannah corrected softly. "We are in this together." "Always," Xander agreed, and sealed the promise with a kiss. The pregnancy was not easy. Hannah struggled with sickness in the early months, and Xander hovered anxiously, doing everything he could to make her comfortable. But as she moved into the middle months and began to show, She bloomed with health and happiness. Xander could not keep his hands off her growing belly, constantly talking to the baby, telling stories and making promises about the life they would have together. Hannah painted the small bedroom off the main room in soft yellow and white, and together they built a cradle from wood Xander had been saving for something special. Howard visited nearly every day, his excitement about becoming a grandfather palpable. He built toys and carved animals, creating a whole menagerie for his grandchild to play with. As winter approached and Hannah's due date drew near, Xander grew increasingly nervous. He had attended plenty of animal births, but the thought of Hannah going through the pain and danger of childbirth terrified him. She seemed much calmer about the whole thing, with the serene confidence of a woman who had already survived the worst life could throw at her. "If I can survive what happened to my family, I can survive this," she told him one night when he confessed his fears. "Besides, I have you, and I have never felt safer than when I am with you." The baby came in late February of 1885 during a fierce snowstorm that trapped them at the ranch with only the midwife who had arrived the day before, sensing the birth was imminent. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when Xander thought he might go mad from feeling so helpless. But Hannah was a warrior, facing each contraction with grim determination, squeezing Xander's hand hard enough to leave bruises. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains and the snow began to ease, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that seemed to shake the rafters. Xander wept openly as the midwife cleaned the baby and placed him in Hannah's arms. He was perfect, tiny and red-faced and furious at being evicted from his comfortable home, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would surely turn the same shade of blue as his father's. "Hello, little one," Hannah whispered, her voice hoarse from the effort of labor. "We have been waiting for you." "He is perfect," Xander breathed, running a gentle finger down his son's impossibly soft cheek. "Hannah, you are amazing. You did so well." She looked up at him with exhausted but radiant eyes. "We should name him." "I was thinking Thomas, after your father." Xander felt his throat tighten with emotion. His father had died when he was young, but he remembered him as kind and strong, everything a father should be. "Thomas Calloway. I like it. Thomas Calloway, welcome to the world." Baby Thomas proved to be a demanding infant, waking every few hours to eat and refusing to be put down for long stretches. But neither Hannah nor Xander minded. They took turns walking him around the house in the small hours of the morning, singing lullabies and telling stories. Watching Hannah with their son, seeing the fierce protective love in her eyes, Xander fell in love with her all over again. Howard was a devoted grandfather, visiting as often as the weather allowed and spoiling Thomas outrageously. He would sit for hours just holding the baby, his weathered face soft with love, and Xander knew that Thomas was helping heal wounds in Howard that had never quite closed after losing Sarah. As Thomas grew from an infant into a toddler, the ranch house filled with the sounds of childhood, laughter and crying, the thump of small feet running across wooden floors, babbled words slowly forming into sentences. Thomas had his father's blue eyes and his mother's quick intelligence, and he was fearless in the way only children who are deeply loved can be. Hannah's voice, which had been growing steadily stronger, blossomed fully during these years. She sang to Thomas constantly, old lullabies her mother had sung to her, and she told him stories about his Aunt Sarah, keeping that memory alive. There were still days when speaking was difficult, when the old trauma would rise up and steal her words, but those days grew fewer and farther between. On Thomas's third birthday, as they celebrated with cake and presents and Howard's presence, Xander pulled Hannah aside for a moment of privacy. They stood on the porch, watching Thomas chase butterflies in the yard, with his grandfather trailing behind him. "Do you ever regret it?" Xander asked quietly. "Choosing this life, choosing me, it has not been easy." Hannah turned to him with surprise clear on her face. "Regret? Xander, this is everything I ever wanted but never dared to dream of. You, Thomas, our home, our life together. I wake up every single day grateful that you taught me to trust again, to love again. The only thing I regret is all the time we lost before we found each other." "I love you," Xander said, pulling her close. "More now than the day we married, if that is even possible." "It is possible," Hannah said with certainty, "because I feel the same way. You are my heart, Xander Calloway. my heart and my home and my everything. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, watching their son play in the sunshine. And Xander thought about that first day Hannah had ridden into Ouray, silent and broken, and marveled at the journey that had brought them here. She had taught him that love was not about words but about truly seeing another person, about learning to read the language of their heart. And he had taught her that she was not broken, that she was strong and whole and worthy of all the love in the world. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the horses as much as his father did. When he was 5, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again, and the entire family was overjoyed. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter Mary was born on a beautiful spring morning in 1890, with Thomas sitting just outside the bedroom door, waiting impatiently to meet his sister. Mary was different from her brother in every way. Where Thomas was bold and reckless, Mary was thoughtful and careful. Where Thomas would charge ahead, Mary would stop and observe. She had Hannah's auburn hair and serious brown eyes, and she took to drawing almost as soon as she could hold a pencil, filling page after page with her observations of the world around her. Watching Hannah with their daughter, teaching her to sketch and telling her stories about the grandmother and aunt she would never meet, Xander was struck by how far they had both come. Hannah spoke freely now, her voice strong and clear, though she still relied on drawing to express her deepest emotions. She had become a pillar of the community, known for her kindness and her quiet strength, and she volunteered at the school, teaching drawing to children who showed interest. The ranch had grown substantially over the years. They now had 3 hired hands to help with the work, and Xander's horses were known throughout the West for their quality and temperament. Hannah managed the business side, with the same careful attention to detail she brought to everything, and together they had built something that would sustain their family for generations. Howard passed peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1893, and they buried him in the Ouray cemetery with a headstone that read, "Beloved Father and Grandfather." Hannah grieved deeply but without the shattering despair that had marked her younger years. She had learned that it was possible to hold both grief and joy, that one did not negate the other. She told stories about her father to Thomas and Mary, keeping his memory alive the way she kept Sarah's alive, weaving them into the fabric of their family history. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xander took Hannah back to their meadow, which had remained their special place throughout the years. They left the children with a neighbor for the day and rode up the mountain together, just the 2 of them, the way it had been in the beginning. The meadow was full of wildflowers, just as it had been the first time Hannah had shown him her drawings. They spread a blanket and lay side by side, watching clouds drift across the perfect blue sky. "Do you remember," Hannah said softly, "that first day you found me here? I was so scared when I heard your horse approaching." "I remember," Xander said, taking her hand. "I remember thinking you were the most mysterious, intriguing person I had ever seen. I remember wanting to understand you." "You did more than understand me," Hannah said, turning to look at him. "You saw me, the real me, underneath all the fear and silence. You taught me that I could be loved, even without words, and then you taught me to find my words again." "You always had them," Xander corrected gently. "You just needed to feel safe enough to use them. You gave me that same gift, you know. Before you, I was going through the motions of life, building the ranch, existing but not really living. You taught me what it meant to truly connect with another person, to communicate on a level deeper than words." Hannah propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with love shining in her eyes. "I used to think that night, the night Sarah died, was the end of my life, that everything worth having had been taken from me. But it was not an ending. It was a beginning, a terrible, painful beginning that led me here, to you, to our children, to this beautiful life we have built together. I would not change any of it, Xander, not one moment, because it all led me to you." Xander reached up and cupped her face in his hand. "You are the bravest person I have ever known, and I will spend the rest of my days being grateful that you chose me." "Always you," Hannah whispered, and kissed him with all the passion and tenderness of 10 years of love and partnership. They made love there in the meadow, in their special place, with the same reverence and joy that had marked their wedding night. And afterward, as they lay wrapped in each other's arms, Xander thought about how lucky he was. Not just lucky, blessed beyond measure. He had found a woman who complimented him perfectly, who challenged him and supported him, who had taught him that love was about seeing and being seen, about finding ways to communicate that went deeper than mere words. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold, they packed up their blanket and prepared to ride home. Home to their children, to their ranch, to the life they had built together through love and determination and an unshakable commitment to each other. "Race you down the mountain," Hannah said with a mischievous smile, and took off before Xander could respond. He laughed and spurred his horse after her, her joy infectious, her laughter ringing out across the hills. This was his life now, full of love and laughter and precious moments stolen from the everyday. This was what happiness looked like. The years continued to pass, bringing both the expected rhythms of ranch life and unexpected adventures. Thomas grew into a fine young man, as skilled with horses as his father, and when he turned 18 in 1898, he announced his intention to marry Sarah Jenkins, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. The wedding was a joyous affair, and Xander and Hannah gained a daughter-in-law who fit perfectly into their family. Mary, now 8 years old, showed remarkable artistic talent, her drawings growing more sophisticated and emotionally resonant with each passing year. Hannah spent hours with her daughter, teaching her techniques and encouraging her to use art as a way to understand and express the world around her. Watching them together, their heads bent over sketchbooks, Xander was reminded of those early days when Hannah had communicated primarily through her drawings. She had passed that gift on to their daughter, and it was beautiful to see. In the summer of 1899, Thomas and Sarah welcomed a son, making Xander and Hannah grandparents at the relatively young ages of 43 and 37. Little James was a fat, happy baby who seemed to smile from the moment he was born, and Hannah doted on him shamelessly. "I cannot believe we are grandparents," she said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "It seems like just yesterday we were starting our own family." "Time has a way of moving faster than we realize," Xander agreed. "But I would not trade a single moment. This life with you, our children, now our grandchildren, it is more than I ever dreamed possible." Hannah leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you remember when I could not speak? When I had to write everything down or hope you could read my expressions?" "I remember," Xander said softly. "But I also remember that we communicated just fine. You taught me to pay attention, to really see what you were telling me. That is a gift I have used every day since, with you, with our children, with everyone I meet." "You saved me," Hannah said quietly. "I know I have said it before, but it is true. You took a broken, silent girl and helped her become a whole woman again. You gave me back my voice and so much more." "We saved each other," Xander corrected. "I was alone before you, Hannah, going through the motions but not really living. You taught me what it meant to truly love someone, to build a partnership based on understanding and respect and genuine connection. We healed each other." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Then Hannah spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "I have been thinking about writing down our story, not for publication or anything like that, but for our children and grandchildren, so they will understand where they came from, the struggles we overcame to build this family. Would that be all right with you?" "I think that is a wonderful idea," Xander said warmly. "They should know. They should understand that love can triumph over even the deepest pain, that silence can be a language all its own, and that the strongest bonds are built on truly seeing and being seen by another person." Hannah smiled and kissed his cheek. "Then I will start tomorrow. And when I am done, we will have a record of how a silent girl and a cowboy who learned to read her eyes found their way to love." Over the next several months, Hannah worked on her memoir, filling page after page with words and illustrations. She wrote about the trauma that had stolen her voice, about meeting Xander and slowly learning to trust again, about the ways he had taught her to feel safe and whole. She wrote about their courtship and marriage, about the births of their children, about the life they had built together on the ranch in the mountains of Colorado. When she finally finished, she presented the leather-bound book to Xander one evening after the children had gone to bed. He read it through the night, unable to stop, reliving their journey together through Hannah's words and beautiful drawings. When he reached the last page, which showed the two of them sitting on their porch with their family around them, he was openly weeping. "This is extraordinary," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have captured everything, sweetheart. The pain and the healing, the silence and the voice, the journey from brokenness to wholeness. Our children and grandchildren will treasure this. I wrote it for them, Hannah said, but also for us. So we never forget how far we have come, how much we have overcome. And so we always remember that love, real love, is about more than words. It is about seeing and being seen, understanding and being understood. Xander pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. I see you, Hannah Calloway. I have seen you from the very beginning, and I will keep seeing you for as long as I draw breath. And I see you, Hannah whispered against his chest. My cowboy, my love, my everything. Thank you for teaching me to trust again, to love again, to live again. They held each other as the fire burned low in the hearth, two souls who had found their perfect match against all odds. Outside, the Colorado night was cold and clear, stars blazing in the black velvet sky. But inside, wrapped in each other's arms, there was only warmth and love and the deep contentment that comes from a life well lived together. The new century brought changes to Ouray and to the Calloway Ranch. The town grew as mining operations expanded, bringing new families and new opportunities. Thomas took over more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch as Xander began to slow down, though he remained active and engaged well into his 60s. Mary married a teacher from Denver in 1905, and they settled in Ouray so she could remain close to her family. She continued her art, eventually opening a small studio in town where she taught drawing to anyone who wanted to learn. Hannah remained the heart of the family, the gravitational center around which everyone else orbited. She was grandmother to 5, beloved by all for her wisdom and her gentle strength. She still drew every day, capturing moments and memories in her careful lines and thoughtful compositions. Her voice remained strong, though there were still occasional days when the old trauma would rise up and speaking became difficult. On those days, Xander would simply take her hand and wait patiently, reading her eyes the way he had learned to do so long ago, understanding what she needed without words. In the spring of 1910, as Xander and Hannah celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary, they took another trip to their meadow. They were older now, moving more slowly, but the love between them burned as bright as ever. They sat on their boulder, now worn smooth by years of visits, and looked out over the familiar landscape. I never get tired of this view, Hannah said softly. It is where we fell in love, where I learned to trust again. It is where I learned what love really means, Xander added. Not just romance and passion, though we have had plenty of that, but true partnership. The kind of love that sees past the surface to the soul underneath. Hannah took his hand, weaving their fingers together the way she had the very first time, all those years ago. If I could go back and tell that frightened, silent girl what her future held, I do not think she would believe me. A husband who loves her, children and grandchildren, a home filled with laughter and joy. It would have seemed impossible. Nothing is impossible when two people are committed to seeing and understanding each other, Xander said. We proved that, sweetheart. Every single day we proved it. They sat together as the sun traced its arc across the sky, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, but always connected. That had been the secret of their marriage, Xander thought. They had learned early on that communication was about so much more than words. It was about paying attention, about really seeing the person you loved, about understanding the language of their eyes and their touch and their silence. As the afternoon began to fade, they made their way slowly back down the mountain. Thomas was waiting at the ranch house with news that his wife Sarah had just given birth to their 4th child, a daughter they had named Hannah in honor of her grandmother. When Hannah heard this, her eyes filled with tears of joy. Another Hannah, she whispered. Another chance for the name to bring happiness instead of sorrow. Your name has always brought happiness, Xander said firmly, pulling her close. From the moment I learned it, from the moment I started to know the woman who carried it, you brought light and love into my life, and now that legacy will continue through your granddaughter. That night, as they prepared for bed, Hannah stood at the window, looking out at the star-filled sky. Xander came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on the top of her head. What are you thinking about? He asked. Everything, Hannah said softly. How far we have come. How blessed we are. How grateful I am that you did not give up on me, even when I could not speak, even when I was so broken I did not know how to be whole again. You were never broken to me, Xander said. Hurt, yes. Traumatized, absolutely, but never broken. I saw your strength from the very beginning, Hannah. I saw your courage and your resilience and your determination to keep going, even when it would have been easier to give up. That is what made me fall in love with you." Hannah turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Xander Calloway. I have loved you for nearly 30 years, and I will love you for however many more we are given. You are my heart, my soul, my everything." "And you are mine," Xander said, kissing her tenderly. "Always and forever, my love. Always and forever." They made love that night with the sweet familiarity of decades together, their bodies knowing each other as well as their hearts did. And afterward, as they lay tangled together in the moonlight, Hannah thought about how different her life had turned out from what she could have ever imagined. The trauma that had stolen her voice had also, in a roundabout way, led her to the greatest love she could have known. Because Xander had learned to hear her even when she could not speak, had learned to see her even when she tried to hide. He had loved her not despite her silence, but through it, teaching her that there were many ways to communicate, many ways to be heard. The years continued their steady march, bringing both joy and sorrow, as years always do. Xander's health began to decline in his early 70s, his joints stiffening with age and old injuries from decades of ranch work. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Hannah never wavered. She cared for him with the same devotion he had shown her all those years ago, anticipating his needs, understanding his unspoken discomforts. Being his voice when speaking became difficult. One evening in late 1920, as they sat together on the porch wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill, Xander took Hannah's hand and squeezed it gently. "I need you to know something," he said quietly. "Whatever time I have left, whether it is days or months or years, every moment has been worth it because I spent it with you. You have been the greatest gift of my life, Hannah. Loving you, being loved by you, building this family and this life together, it has been the greatest privilege I could have imagined." Tears streamed down Hannah's face, but she smiled through them. "Do not talk like you are going anywhere soon, old man. We still have grandchildren to spoil and great-grandchildren to meet. We still have years ahead of us." "I hope so," Xander said. "God, I hope so. But if not, I need you to promise me something. Promise me you will keep living fully, keep loving fully. Promise me you will not retreat back into silence and isolation. You have come too far, fought too hard, to lose yourself again." "I promise," Hannah whispered, bringing his hand to her lips and kissing it. "But only if you promise to fight to stay with me for as long as possible. I am not ready to lose you, Xander. I will never be ready." "Then I will fight," he promised. "For you, for our family, for all the life we still have to live together. I will fight with everything I have." And he did. Xander rallied, his determination to remain with his beloved wife, giving him strength when his body wanted to surrender. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in the spring of 1923, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a family that stood as testament to the power of their love. Hannah, now 61 years old, remained as beautiful to Xander as the day he had first seen her. Her auburn hair had silvered, her face lined with years of laughter and tears, but her eyes were still the same, still filled with intelligence and strength and the deep love she bore him. That night, after everyone had left and they were alone in the quiet house, they lay in bed together, bodies curved together as they had been for 4 decades. "We did good, did we not?" Xander murmured sleepily. "Built something real and lasting." "We did better than good," Hannah said, running her fingers through his silver hair. "We built a love story for the ages, the kind that starts with brokenness and silence and grows into something so beautiful it takes your breath away. We built a family, a legacy, a life full of meaning and purpose. We did extraordinary, my love." "All because I learned to read your eyes," Xander said with a soft chuckle. "All because I looked past the silence to the woman underneath." "All because you saw me," Hannah corrected gently. "Really, truly saw me. And all because I was brave enough to let you in, to trust you with my broken pieces. We healed each other, Xander. We made each other whole." "We did indeed," Xander agreed, his voice fading as sleep claimed him. "We did indeed, my love." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, Two souls who had found their perfect match and built a lifetime of love together. Outside, the Colorado night was peaceful and still, the stars shining down on the ranch they had built together, the family they had created together, the legacy of love that would endure for generations. Xander lived another 7 years, defying the doctors who kept predicting his decline. He remained active and engaged, riding horses until he was nearly 80, teaching his great-grandchildren about the ranch, and spending every possible moment with Hannah. They took their last trip to their meadow in the summer of 1929, riding slowly up the familiar path on gentle horses, both of them knowing, without speaking, that this would be their final visit. The meadow was as beautiful as ever, carpeted with wildflowers and humming with life. They sat on their boulder for hours, hands clasped together, watching the play of light on the mountains, remembering all the moments they had shared in this special place. "Thank you," Xander said finally, breaking the peaceful silence. "Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for trusting me with your heart. Thank you for every day, every moment, every breath we have shared together. My life has been extraordinary because you were in it." Hannah was crying, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for hearing me when I was silent. Thank you for loving me when I thought I was unlovable. You gave me back my life, Xander. You gave me everything." They kissed there one last time in their meadow, a kiss that held 46 years of love and partnership, of struggles overcome and joys celebrated, of two people who had learned to communicate in a language deeper than words. Xander passed peacefully in his sleep in early December of 1930, with Hannah holding his hand and his children and grandchildren gathered around his bed. His last words were, "I see you, my love. I will always see you." The funeral was attended by nearly everyone in Ouray, a testament to the man Xander had been and the life he had lived. But it was Hannah's eulogy that brought tears to every eye. She stood at the front of the church, 84 years old, but still straight-backed and strong, and spoke in a clear, steady voice. "My husband taught me that love is not about perfect words or grand gestures. It is about truly seeing another person, understanding them on a level deeper than language." He looked at a broken, silent girl and saw strength and courage and beauty. He learned to read my eyes, to understand my heart, and in doing so, he gave me back my voice and my life. We built a love story that spanned nearly 5 decades, that created a family that fills this church today. Xander Calloway was a good man, a wonderful husband, and an extraordinary father and grandfather. But more than that, he was someone who understood that the deepest communication happens not with words, but with presence, with attention, with the willingness to truly see and be seen. I will love him for the rest of my days and beyond, into whatever comes next. And I will be forever grateful that our paths crossed that day in Ouray, that he took the time to understand a woman who could not speak, and that together we built something beautiful and lasting. Hannah lived another 8 years, surrounded by her family and sustained by the memories of her life with Xander. She continued to draw until her hands became too unsteady, capturing moments and memories, adding to the visual record of their life together. She spent time with her great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their great-grandfather and the love that had sustained them through decades of marriage. On a warm spring evening in 1938, Hannah Preston Calloway passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76. She was buried next to Xander in the Ouray Cemetery, their headstone reading simply, "Together in life, together in eternity. They taught us that love needs no words." The family gathered after the funeral to go through Hannah's things, and they found her memoir, that leather-bound book she had written so many years ago. They took turns reading it aloud, tears streaming down their faces as they relived the extraordinary love story of their parents and grandparents. The story of a woman whose words were trapped behind years of silence, and the cowboy who learned to read her eyes instead. The story of two broken people who found each other and built something whole and beautiful and lasting. Young Hannah, now a woman of 30 with children of her own, held the book carefully and looked around at her assembled family. "This is our legacy," she said softly. "Not just the ranch or the family name, but this story. The story of how Grandma and Grandpa taught us that love transcends words, that true communication comes from really seeing another person, that the strongest bonds are built on understanding and acceptance and unwavering commitment. We should honor their memory by living those principles every day. And they did. The Calloway family continued to grow and thrive in the mountains of Colorado, each generation telling the story of Xander and Hannah, passing down the lessons they had learned about love and communication, and the courage it takes to be truly seen by another person. The ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they committed to seeing and understanding each other completely. And up in the meadow, where it all began, where a silent woman and an observant cowboy had first learned each other's language, wildflowers continued to bloom every summer, painting the landscape in brilliant colors, a living memorial to a love that had transcended words and changed the course of a family forever.